Everybody, welcome back to another episode of Shifty's 49ers Talk. Today's video, we are going to talk about the breaking news that the San Francisco 49ers, we got ourselves a new defensive coordinator. The 49ers have hired Steve Wilks. We're going to talk all about it, so let's not waste any time. Let's jump right in. It has just been announced on Twitter by Tom Pelissero, Ian Rappaport, that the 49ers are making Steve Wilks the next defensive coordinator. And my very initial thoughts are, I'm thrilled with this move. Over the moon. I think it's a home run hire for the San Francisco 49ers, and we're going to talk all about why I think it's a great hire. Well, before that, let's get into Steve Wilks, a little bit of a background about him. So Steve Wilks, 53 years old. His coaching career began back in 95, worked his way up through the ranks, and then in 2006, he became the defensive back coach in Chicago. The year they went to the Super Bowl, actually really led by that defense. He's coached in the NFL for 15 years, and I think what makes this a really great hire is because Steve Wilks, his background, when you look at his coaching from, Chicago, then went to the Chargers, then to the Panthers, and even more recently, his background really is coaching defensive backs. And you couple that with the really good news from yesterday that Kocurek will be coming back to the San Francisco 49ers, and he's a guy who can kind of take care of things on the defensive line, and then you have Steve Wilks kind of look at things more towards the back end of the defense. So I think it's just a really good match. Of course, you look at things like scheme, and Steve Wilks has definitely adjusted a little bit. Used to be much more like a man-to-man guy, but has really adapted and really been able to implement and have cover three just be a much bigger part of his defense, which is a lot of what we do in San Francisco. Although, and another great thing is that, under DeMeco Ryans, we did also put in quite a bit more man coverage as well, especially for our outside cornerbacks. So really just, I think, a great fit from like a scheme aspect, from an experience aspect. And I did a video about a week ago discussing potential candidates for defensive coordinators, and Steve Wilks wasn't on that video, and the simple reason for that was I was kind of assuming that he would be given the permanent head coaching job in Carolina, considering how well he did there as the interim head coach, and so that's why he wasn't on that video. But I think this is a great match with regards to his background, his experience, and that's something that I was really looking at, and something that I mentioned a number of times also in that video, is that I think we're going to go with a guy who has a lot of coaching experience. And, this is what we're doing. It's basically going to be like, let's keep the ball rolling on this defense of how well it performed. Really the last 4 years or so, 3 of the last 4 years, this defense has been really good. And I believe a guy like Steve Wilks can absolutely keep that going. Now, let's look at the job he did last season in Carolina. So you look at it, he was the defensive passing game coordinator, the defensive backs coach there initially. After week 5, when the 49ers beat down on the Panthers, Matt Rule, he ends up getting fired, and Wilks becomes the interim head coach. At that moment, the Panthers were 1-4 in the season. For the rest of the year, they go 6-6. And you might think, well, that's not crazy impressive. But let's also take into account that the Panthers ended up trading arguably their best player in Christian McCaffrey to the 49ers. But not only that, they were having all kinds of different things with like quarterbacks. Baker Mayfield gets cut. Then you have, a bunch of different guys coming in. You have Sam Darnold playing. Is it PJ Walker playing? And it's just like to manage all of that, and also to ultimately, in their last 8 games, the Panthers won 5 of their last 8 games and actually had an outside shot at the playoffs, believe it or not. Bad division, but that aside, I think just to be able to do that, and also just to rally the team when so many things are going against you, to me, it's really impressive. And unfortunately, I think when you look at Steve Wilks' coaching career, I think he's been put in a lot of really bad situations. So let's, kind of go back to 2018. Steve Wilks was hired as the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals. Who was his quarterback that year? Well, the Cardinals decided to draft Josh Rosen, number 10 overall, if I'm not mistaken. And so basically his quarterback was a rookie Josh Rosen, who was, and we know that he's awful, not a good player at all. And he did an admirable job there, I would say, Steve Wilks, but just really, a victim of the situation there in Arizona, and gets fired after 1 year, not even given really a fair shot at being a head coach. So I think Steve Wilks, all in all, when everything you hear about the guy, it's just, he's a leader, he really gets the best out of his players. And I think what you're going to see in San Francisco is going to be similar in terms of performance, probably to what you would have seen back in around 2017 when he was the defensive coordinator with the Carolina Panthers, where they still had some really good talent around there. And you look at that, they had a top 10 defense, and their run defense was actually top 3 in the NFL that year. And I believe that he's in such a great situation in San Francisco, and maybe arguably the best situation in his entire career with regards to being a defensive coordinator, simply because, look, we have all pro players at every level of the defense. Nick Bosa, Fred Warner, Talanoa Hufanga. Add in a bunch of, possibly, Pro Bowl caliber players in guys like Eric Armstead, Dre Greenlaw, Mooney Ward, even potentially, and then you have potential guys who can really develop, who could really burst onto the scene, like Lenore, maybe Drake Jackson. So you have a lot of talent, but also to back all of that up, you have an offense which should be really, really good going into next year. I think this is an offense that's going to just, take another leap, where Shanahan will have Trey Lance to work with again for the offseason, the whole offseason, Christian McCaffrey, and I think it's a great situation for all parties involved. Now, look, this isn't a perfect fit in terms of it, and it's no fit in the NFL is ever perfect. It's not like he's going to be the defensive coordinator here forever, and that's really the one downside to this hire, is that I think the only thing that I can really see as a negative here is that I wouldn't be surprised if Steve Wilks does such a good job next season that he ends up just getting a head coaching job somewhere else, and essentially that leaves us in 12 months from now basically being like, well, who's going to be our next defensive coordinator? And but overall, really, really thrilled with the move here. Again, I think it's a great fit, and he's had a lot of success, and unfortunately, he's been put in a lot of bad situations. I mean, a situation that I didn't even talk about is, if we look back to 2019, so after his 1 year with the Arizona Cardinals as head coach, he goes to Cleveland in 2019. Freddie Kitchens is the head coach, with Baker Mayfield again as quarterback, throwing a ton of interceptions. But overall there, I think they did pretty well. If you look at their some of their ranks, ultimately in yardage, they were pretty middle of the pack, but they did have a top 10 passing defense, which I think is really, really important. And you factor in that Cleveland defense had basically no talent there. Really, the only two guys who stand out to you on that roster would have been Myles Garrett and Denzel Ward. And also in that season, both of those guys missed a decent amount of time. So I think it's a great situation, again, for all parties involved. Really, really stoked on the hire. Really can't wait to hear your guys' thoughts on the move to bring in Steve Wilks. I think it's an absolute A-plus move, especially when you factor in that Chris Kocurek is going to be sticking with the 49ers, those two guys together, and maybe we can bring in some really top-notch positional coaches as well. So really thrilled with the move. I think it's really, arguably the best move we could have made outside of possibly a Vic Fangio, but absolutely thrilled. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, guys. If you like the content, do subscribe to the channel, like the video, and before I head out, I'm going to say two things. The butt counts, and I'll catch you guys on the flip side.